Hi all, let's have a look at another amazing game from the Norway chess tournament, which was played at Stavanger in Norway. In round 1, Hikaru Nakamura was playing Jon Ludvig, so a local Norwegian, Magnus's close friend, lifetime friend, second, very strong grandmaster of his own right. 2677, slightly below the super GMs, not over 2700. Nakamura's 2802, so one of his highest ever ratings. So he plays actually c4, the English opening, e5, g3. Maybe players are playing c4 nowadays because e4 is such heavily analysed territory, and you've got things like the Berlin defence. So it's interesting to have some English openings. Bishop g2, d5, c takes, knight takes. Now knight f3 was played. You might be wondering, hang on, what about e4? Is that chase the knight? Well, not really. e4, we have check, winning the pawn. Okay, so yeah, knight f3 is perfectly playable. Black played knight c6 in response, just protecting his e-pawn. White castled. Knight b6. We see b3. So yeah, if black plays e4, that pawn's going to be weak and subject to attack later. It's like a reverse Alekhine defense strategy, trying to encourage the opponent to have some weak pawns. But yeah, black doesn't want to push that pawn here. It's tempting maybe to gain a tempo to attack, to drive the knight back, but it's only temporary inconvenience, and pawns don't go backwards. So basically black played bishop e7, and we have bishop b2, putting more pressure on e5. And the way white's played it after f6, he's actually not pussyfooting around with d3 or knight c3. He actually plays d4 all in one go. And actually, I have to say this is slightly theoretically interesting what Naka's done, because he's not been tempted at any point to play knight c3 or d3. Just before we go past this point, I just want to point this out, that actually in this position, live book indicates knight c3 or d3 are the most popular moves. This is slightly a rarer bird to play b3, and it might be the case, well, especially instead of bishop e7, it might actually be the case this might actually be playable as an aggressive attempt by black, even though the pawn's really weak and this seems like positional suicide. That black could actually indulge in an attack which might not just belong to 5-minute games. This attack here seems actually a little bit on the dangerous side. For example, this variation I've just checked out earlier with an engine. It seems okay. I mean, it seems there might be some interesting compensation here for black to basically indulge in this sort of gambit. But anyway, yeah, because it's an interesting move order that Nakamura has actually played b3 here instead of the much more standard knight c3 or d3. So I'm not sure how tested this position is actually after b3 with e4. It's interesting anyway. But yeah, black trying to play, classically, but he's actually letting white play d4 in one go, hitting e5 quite hard. And now black does commit to e4. And you might think, doesn't this have the same sort of problems now? This pawn's weak. The knight does retreat, a temporary inconvenience, as previously mentioned. f5, and it does block in this bishop. So potentially, positionally, this could be suspect if white, for example, can make use of these squares, try and fix these pawns, undermine them later with f3. This might generate a lot more piece play for white. It's a biting point, this pawn chain. And actually, Naka doesn't wait here. He bites the pawn chain immediately with f3. So a very interesting scenario, very interesting opening. I think we're totally out of live book territory already now in this position. So yes, it's slight differences in the way it's being played. So we reach quite a novel position here. E takes, knight takes f3, and yes, it's easy to be slightly negative about black because the bishop's blocked in, but actually, what if the bishop just went here and here? It's blockading against. This is then a backward pawn on a semi-open fold, technically. So it's not without its downsides for white, this particular structure, this f3 concept. So we see knight d5, and immediately black's threatening knight e3 as well. So white parries queen with queen d3, black castles, and black might be tempted for f4 now to liberate the bishop, if nothing else, and put pressure on white's king side. The locks are put on that, the brakes are put on that with e3. And now we see this bishop e6. The bishop's not so terrible here. Black seems to have, quite a good position out of the opening here. We see a3, and it's like a3 does support ideas like knight d2, maybe knight c4 later, knight e5, maybe just putting the rook here, b4, b5, knight e5. These are the sort of ideas with this c-file, the Sicilian defense in reverse c-file that white has. We see queen d7, knight bd2. And black plays very classically, rook ad8. His position seems entirely harmonious and logical. It doesn't seem so bad. Does white want to try and get rid of this pawn? Isn't it going to weaken d4 if he ever moves this pawn forward in the future? Or is there some other compensation after that? We see rook ac1. There might be a temptation for this sort of plan to gain a tempo. I'm not entirely sure that sort of plan to rush in to gain a tempo on black's queen does that much. For example, like this, black could take here, play c6, reinforcing d5. The queen has got some possibility to come out to h5, the bishop to f6 later, and it looks a little bit vulnerable then, the knight on f6. So it's a tempo gained, but potentially then soon after a tempo lost as the knight's stuck out there on e5. So Nakamura is careful to avoid maybe this sort of scenario. It might be tempting, but he actually plays just rook ac1 instead. And he's still got b4, b5 as a plan. We see knight b6, which I think tries to discourage b4, because then what about this gaining a tempo? It's done anyway. We see b4 anyway. And actually, the concern about b5 is parried with a6. Now, isn't there a concern for knight a4? Is that not a useful move for black in this position? Knight b3, knight a4 is played here. The bishop just drops back, actually. But now bishop d5, and again, you could say that visually, isn't black doing very nicely here? A move like queen e6 puts pressure on e3 and also, this knight, or does it want to come to c5? Well, actually, the knight doesn't want to come to c5. Well, the way Naka played it, he actually played knight bd2. Let's have a quick look. Is knight c5 actually that tempting? Maybe not. Maybe it's just taking on bishop e4. It's a nice blockade on the light squares. So I think for this reason, actually, knight b2 is more concerned with liberating with e4, even though it might weaken d4. I think there's something else going on here to get rid of this pawn. It's a structural liability, perhaps more than the d pawn. So we see queen e6 stopping e4, and maybe queen h6 as well is introduced. So white plays rook fe1 again, as though there's interest in e4, and black kind of allows it now, knight b6, because maybe he's saying, well, aren't you going to weaken the d4 pawn now if you really play e4? Naka does this anyway. So this is an interesting positional point, or trying to balance against the dynamics of the position. What is going on here? Hasn't white just isolated the d pawn? Well, he's liberated his pieces though, and also he's gained access now to the e5 square frontally. And with that, that could be a way of just plonking a knight on e5 and having a nice position, basically. And if black ever takes, then this pawn becomes actually a passed pawn on the e-file. So actually, it's a lot of swings and roundabouts are going on here, even though you could say, just simplistically, white has this isolated d pawn. It's this outpost square which is actually supported. And that's, one of the classic properties, actually, of an isolated queen's pawn is supporting the outpost squares. Okay, so queen g6, and we see queen coming out of this pin, queen e2. So this knight's freer to move. Rook fe8. Yes, it looks bad to have an extra on the white queen. But now knight e5, it's supported by the isolated pawn. This is a great thing. Perhaps black should resist the temptation of taking on e5. It is a little bit more dangerous to have a pawn on e5. But black took, giving white a potentially dangerous passed pawn. If queen h6, this might be tolerable, although unpleasant. This might actually be a tolerable position For example, like this, safeguarding things, bishop b2, that's or queen f5 here. Is it a big deal? Can the knight be tolerated? Maybe, but yeah, the knight was snapped off here. So another structural transition to understand here. We have a passed pawn on the e file. Maybe white's using that c5 square later. It seems a natural square to make use of. We have an immediate tactical threat actually of rook takes c7 here as well. Let's just hold on a sec. Let's just see in this position, because yes, the knight was actually shielding the c7 pawn. So yeah, that created that immediate tactical threat, and that's now parried here with c6, which weakens though, makes that piece a bit loose, and Naka immediately taps into that with bishop d4, and looking at that c5 point, the knight retreats. Now, very interesting move tactically here is played by Naka, which is bishop f3. So the bishop is threatening simply to skewer the queen against the rook. So what does black do against it? It's a bit uncomfortable. In conjunction with this potentially dangerous passed pawn, black plays rook f8, but bishop h5 played anyway, hassling the queen. And again now the queen is hassled with bishop e3. The queen moves, but the knight now is loose. Bishop f4, protecting the knight. Black dare not take on e5 here, by the way. He plays actually a5. If he took on e5, then knight c3, and we've got a nice exploitation of that pin. This is just worse for black. You might think, oh, hold on, g6, that's still just worse for black. Just take here. This is very nice. So to be avoided by black, this position. So yeah, he shouldn't really take that pawn. He plays a5. And now we see knight g5. Again, a tempo on the black queen. Nuisance moves for black. Doesn't really want to give up the dark square bishop. After bishop takes g5, there's a lot of pressure there. Plays queen f5. And now we see bishop g4. Again, nuisance moves against the black queen. Hitting the queen again. Getting to the time control as well. But now we see e6. And this pawn is only 2 steps away from being queening in theory. But there's the blockade on e7, right? Knight f6. It's supported, so it's not so weak. Bishop f7 check. So the bishop's a long way from its fianchetto position. A downside of this might be, king safety, surely. Here we see now a critical juncture of the game, rook f1, where it seems actually that the blockade is literally going to be lifted pretty soon with bishop d6, hitting the queen and hitting e7. Black needs to tread very carefully in this position to actually stay on the board, actually. And the move, apparently, to try and stay on the board here, the best move found by engines. It's a difficult position with this passed e pawn. The move to try and stay on the board is bishop b3, apparently. I'll give you some technical variations to support this. Bishop d6 hitting the queen and hitting e7. Queen takes g5. Bishop takes e7. Rook d2, and we see the exposure, the bishop being there is not defending the king. This is dangerous for white. Bishop takes f8. We can take here. And this position, is lost for white. Now, after rook d2, if queen f3, bishop d5, and that's showing up white's king safety issues. And here, say bishop takes f6, queen h6 is best, pressing mate, bishop takes, queen takes, and black is doing great here. So yes, it doesn't work. Things don't work so easily after bishop b3, it seems, for bishop d6. This might be one of the only moves to play in here in this position. It gives also access with queen d3. So say white wanted to take time out to support the knight on g5, then queen d3 can be slipped in. So yeah, bishop b3 might be the way to play this technically if black wants to stay on the board. The way he played it actually transitions to basically a forced loss immediately. Unbelievable. But this E pawn provides a quick simplification to a forced loss. You won't believe it. But knight E4, and I'll show you. White just takes on E4 here. Takes, queen takes. Well, let's see. If bishop takes, then we've still got, you know, the discovered attack on the queen problem. So black sorted out bishop d6, it seems, but only to find now, well, Nakamura thought he was winning after this move, in fact. White to play. So although bishop d6 to challenge the blockader has been extinguished, what does white have here, which is quite a crushing move? This isn't move 41. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play in this position, starting from now? Clue, it's to do with lifting the blockade on e7. Okay, positional move, bishop e3, just to go to c5. It's difficult for black to do something about this. He doesn't want to lose a pawn. Say he does this to be able to meet. I'm using the word meet. It's quite a popular term actually used by annotators when a move is met in advance. But here, you know, it's losing a pawn like this. Bishop b6, losing the a5 pawn. But that might have been one of the better things to do here, believe it or not. So the way black played it, it just completely just loses. Just quickly. Sorry, I should have. I'll put this engine bits on just to absolutely check. This is already a really bad position. So if you consider rook c8 to actually be the best move here, this is unfortunate then. For bishop c5, got to keep the blockade, otherwise e7 is going to be crushing because of that bishop on e8. This position, yes, is actually technically one of the better ways to play the position. So it's pretty miserable if that really is the case. But the move played descends towards the end quite quickly. Here, which is a takes b4. White certainly doesn't need to recapture. The much bigger opportunity of lifting the blockade. Bishop c5. What does black do? If that blockade is lifted, e7 becomes impossible to stop. Very, very bad position for black now. Black's really is actually busted here, believe it or not. He's busted. From what was a complex middle game position, has become an issue for the e-pawn to decide the game. Black tried rook d2, trying to exploit white's king safety. The absence of the thin check bishop being here. Doesn't matter. Nakamura played the calm, cool move, rook fe1. And what is black doing now in this position? 2 pieces attacked. He takes on c5. And now e7's crashing through. He tries this check. What else here? If bishop d5, rook takes d5, and then e7 crashing through, winning material. Yes, not very nice. So yeah, rook g2 check. The king just goes to f1, pretty safe. Not to h1. Yeah, because that's like very, very good for black. Check, winning the rook with check. So yeah, king f1, and it's kind of materially won now, this position. Black tries b3 as though he's got a dangerous pawn. Not really. This is taken. b2. This is safeguarded from queening with rook e1. We have rook takes h2, trying to get the rook back. Doesn't really help. White's got a key move here, which is really, really good and avoids any final tricks. Can you see what white does in this position? A simple and strong move. Naka plays actually the most accurate move. Really, one of the more accurate moves it seems. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play? Avoids any tricks. Rook c e5, just safeguarding e1. A move like King G1 might actually allow another little trick, but it doesn't really help black Rook E2. This is only a temporary inconvenience. In fact, white could even consider just taking this, allowing the queening. This position with E7 coming up is still winning for white, and you see there's actually no major checks and stuff. There's nothing really for black to do, so yeah, he'll be material down here as well. But yeah, these tricks are avoided. Basically, we just see rook ce5, and then we have check. King just goes here. Black at least gets his rook back, but now e7. Finally, this happens. The blockade lifted. The blockade from the dangerous pass pawn, which has emerged from this decision to isolate the queen's pawn, which made that pass pawn, is now deciding the game. Black, with a sense of humour, he didn't resign here. He played rook a8, allowing under promotion to a rook apparently. So both sides with a sense of humour. Rook takes e8. Checkmate. A neat game, yeah, a very, very interesting game, I thought, in the English opening, so from round one. There were lots of interesting structural transitions, pawn structure, how, sometimes you can have a nice queen's pawn, but it provides an outpost square. The outpost square can lead to something like a passed pawn. There were a lot of tempo gains in this game, technical, tempo gaining on the queen, trying to get an advantage through kind of brute force, forcing the opponent to do stuff. Then the blockade became a major issue for lifting the blockade. It was after bishop e3, I think Nakamura felt he had serious winning chances. So a kind of instructive game for the exploitation of the passed pawn, really, from one perspective. I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.